think it's fine now.
Okay, yeah.
Right, good morning. Amir, it's the evening here in South Africa. I suppose the morning where you are.
That's correct.
So good morning to you, and good morning to everybody around who is watching, who is the morning at this moment. Good afternoon to everybody who is in the afternoon, and good evening to those who are watching this webinar series in the evening time. Again, thank you, Amir, for being with us today. We are very privileged to have you on this webinar series. Those who are not familiar with us, our name is Africa for Palestine. We're a human rights NGO primarily concerned with Palestinian rights and raising Palestinian awareness in the African continent. Our main task particularly is not only raise awareness, but to push back Israeli influence in the continent. We work with several organizations that identify with our cause and principles, different religious organizations, civil society, political parties across the board. We have this webinar series. We started them last month, if I'm not mistaken, or not, in July, where we invite different activists from different walks of life to share expertise and to speak on the Palestinian question. And today we are joined by Amer Zahr, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, a Palestinian who's based in the USA, an activist, an artist, and an academic. Again, thank you very much for being with us. How are you feeling?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Ali.
Great. Let's get into it. Can you tell us and the audience about yourself, who you are, and some of the work that you do?
Sure. So I am a Palestinian-American. I was born in Jordan. We came to America when I was 3 years old, and I grew up outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a very white place. It was very, very suburban and American and white, and I was the only Arab kid in my school. And you know, I always knew that we were different. I grew up with culture and all these kinds of things, but really in my teenage years, my parents were always political activists. I remember going to demonstrations when I was a kid. And in my teenage years, I really got much more strongly into Palestine activism. And then, of course, when I went to college and I did my bachelor's degree and my master's degree and my law degree, stayed active through all of that. And then, Ali, when I finished law school, I decided to become a comedian. So that's when I became a stand-up comedian. And I've been traveling, you know, throughout the United States and Europe and Canada and the Arab world doing comedy for about, 13 years now, very consistently, and really trying to tell the Palestinian story through comedy. And I've been involved, obviously, in politics as well, working on a couple presidential campaigns, being active with the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign twice. And I live here in Michigan, United States, in a city called Dearborn, which is the home to the largest Arab American community and the largest Arab community outside of the Arab world is here in Michigan, and that's where I live.
Wow. All right. That's wonderful. For audience, those who are not aware, comedy is an art, and like many other disciplines of art, it is very, very political. So tell us, I mean, how has your art been received, especially in the United States? You've mentioned that you've been telling the Palestinian story through art. Just tell us, how has it been received, particularly in the US, and of course, where you also travel with it?
Yeah, I mean, look, with mainstream audiences in the United States, it's usually received very well, but being Palestinian and talking about Palestine in your art is not something that opens up many doors for you in mainstream media and mainstream culture. And so it's still it's sort of like the last taboo subject, right? You can talk about anything, but you can't talk about that. And that creates a lot of roadblocks, I would say. But on the other hand, you know, whenever I perform for Arab American audiences or Palestinian-American audiences or Muslim American audiences, there's that strong connection of being able to tell our story and connecting with the audiences. And then, of course, I perform in Palestine usually 4 or 5 times a year at least. Of course, this year with the pandemic has been much different, but I do a comedy festival there every year where I bring 7 to 10 comedians from America, and we go and perform in Palestine for a week in Ramallah, Bethlehem, and Jerusalem. And so that is an experience. Because I put Palestine at the forefront of my comedy, these are experiences that I wouldn't have if I was a bit more of a mainstream, you know, sort of comedian. So I'm happy to trade off and be able to be with my people a lot and be able to tell our story if it means I don't have access to the sort of mainstream American culture.
I'm interested that you mentioned mainstream American culture. I mean, we consume a lot of American mainstream culture in terms of movie, music, and a lot around the world. It's not different in Africa and South Africa, particularly. A couple of months ago, if not weeks, Seth Rogen came out and said, I was fed a number of lies in the industry. And we've seen in the past how the industry gatekeeps from those who actively speak the Palestinian story, for those who raise the Palestinian voice. Have you met the same kind of experience in the industry that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's definitely something going on in American culture in the last, especially the last 3 or 4 years, but I think it's been heading this way for the last probably 10 or 20 years, where there is a reassessment of how Israel is thought of in American culture. And that's happening in academics, it's happening on campuses, and of course it's happening in the arts as well. And yeah, I mean, I think when Seth Rogen, the comedian, said that, you know, he said something crazy. Well, not crazy, but he said something which was so incredible, where he said, you know, when I was raised and they were telling us about Israel, they never told us that there were people there. You know, and so this goes to what every Palestinian has been saying for a long time, which is that we're constantly trying to prove that we exist. You know, we're constantly trying to prove our humanity, and we're constantly trying to prove that we have a culture and a history and a tie to this land, perhaps stronger than anybody else's. And to hear that, you know, Jewish Americans, or he's Canadian, that Jewish Canadians or Jews in North America are raised to hear about Israel without basically ever hearing about the Palestinians, or without knowing that we are the indigenous people, that's kind of really scary to hear. And there's going to have to be a whole level of sort of re-education about these things. But, you know, I try to do that through my comedy. I made a video a couple months ago about Palestinians that gotten close to 1 million views now, where I use this term in Arabic that my mom always used, which is "akhaduha mafrushi," which means they took it furnished. You know, they took our country furnished. They didn't come to some empty desert. They didn't come to some place. You know, this is a colonial project just like any other. They come to a place where there's a thriving civilization, and they use force and violence to take the resources and land of that place. This happened to be a settler colonial thing, you know, much like South Africa, much like America. And so this is something that we Palestinians find ourselves in the uncomfortable position of having to consistently remind people that we were there. And if the land enough doesn't remind you, you know, if it's not enough of a reminder that Israelis eat hummus and falafel and all these kinds of things, if it's not enough of a reminder that if you look at their houses in Jerusalem and Haifa and Jaffa, that they are built in the way houses have been built there for thousands of years with the Arab arches and all these. If it's not enough of a reminder that Hebrew slang is Arabic, I mean, like, this is what we have to consistently deal with. And so that is a major, major struggle, but we're happy to do it. We're happy to do it if you need us to, and tell everybody that we were there and we exist, and that Jesus was related to us. I mean, it's funny, Ali. We have these America. America's so dumb. America's the dumbest country in the world. Okay, we have by far the dumbest people in the world, and there is this debate that goes on in America. I don't know if you've ever seen it before, and maybe it goes on in other places in the world, of what did Jesus look like? Okay, there's these debates that go on all the time. What did Jesus look like? What, we all agree that Jesus is from Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem. He was in Jerusalem. He's from
undisputed. We all agree. Yes.
Yeah, we all agree on this. And those places are all like just an hour away from each other. Okay. If you want to know what Jesus looked like, it's very simple. There's still people living in those places. You can go to those places and look at them, okay, and get a pretty good idea of what he looked like. All right, yes, there's been some changes. We've had some crusaders along the way. We've had some other people along the way. But I mean, you can get the basic idea. But when they have these arguments about what did Jesus, no one has an argument about what Christopher Columbus looked like. Okay, he was Italian. You can go to Italy and you can kind of check out what people look like. But we have to consistently remind people that we exist, that we're from the place that is the cradle of all of these things, that Christianity is foreign in America. It's not foreign in Palestine. It's been in Palestine for 2,000 years. It's been in America for 400 years. It's foreign here. But we have to keep having these conversations. That's the struggle of being a Palestinian. And it's precisely because pro-Israel groups and forces have made it their strategy not only to push their own case of Zionism and Jewish nationalism, but an essential part of Zionism is the erasure of Palestinianness, right? That's essential to Zionism because it's much easier to explain Zionism if there was nobody there. So they say we came to a land without a people for a people without a land. Of course this is a lie. They say they made the desert bloom. It was already blooming. There was a civilization there already. My two grandparents that got kicked out of Jaffa in 1948, a beautiful seaside city on the Mediterranean, they were teachers. One was a principal, one was a teacher. They were professionals. I mean, people were kicked out who were intellectuals and professors and artisans and merchants. And, there was a civilization there thriving for years, centuries. In fact, the civilization, ironically enough, that is the successors of many other civilizations that were in the land of Palestine, including a Jewish civilization that was in the land of Palestine. This is the ridiculousness that we have to deal with every day, Ali.
It's interesting you do mention about Palestinian culture and how it's consumed now and is being stolen away from Palestine. We have the same experience in South Africa when the Dutch settled in South Africa. They reproduced with the indigenous people, and over some times they felt that they were African, and that is the same ideology that apartheid shares with apartheid Israel, the erasure of the indigenous people, the stealing of their culture, and to claim in some aspect, like Israel does, to be indigenous to the land. Right. So this type of messaging, and it's synonymous with South African artists during apartheid, who were exiled into other countries. But this kind of messages was not received. This kind of message was hate speech. This kind of messaging was anti-white. So does your messaging also in your community get that it's anti-Semitic? Who be scared of that kind of messaging?
Of course. I mean, look, being Palestinian already just by itself is labeled as being anti-Semitic. And then when you actually start to talk about being Palestinian and start to criticize Israel, you are then labeled as anti-Semitic. But here's the thing, Ali. Not only can we easily throw away that argument, right? Criticizing a country doesn't mean you hate the ethnicity of the people in that country. If you criticize and denounce Saudi Arabia, which says that it speaks for all the Muslims in the world, then it doesn't mean you hate all Muslims, okay? You know, but even more importantly, Palestinians are unique in a particular regard, which is that, you know, to everyone out there watching, believe it or not, there's a diversity of opinion when it comes to Israel in the Jewish community. The Jewish community has a diversity of opinion. There are many people who are right-wing Zionists, there are middle-of-the-road Zionists, there are anti-Zionists, and these things change and they're fluid. And they're having these discussions.
One called leftist Zionism as well.
Yeah, then there's leftist Zionism, which is another problem, and then there's anti-Zionism. But anyway, there's a spectrum of thought in the Jewish community when it comes to Israel. And there is no group of people in the world that is more familiar with that spectrum of thought than Palestinians, because we deal directly with all of the people on this spectrum. Okay, even a lot of Jews aren't aware of the diversity of thought when it comes to Israel within the Jewish community. And so my point is, if there's anyone who, when Donald Trump first got elected to office, he was in a press conference and someone said to him, you know, we're worried that you might be anti-Semitic. And Donald Trump said something really stupid. He said, I'm the least anti-Semitic person that you know, which is a weird way to deny. You can just say I'm not anti-Semitic, okay? He said, I'm the least anti-Semitic person. But you know what? Palestinians are the least anti-Semitic people on earth because, again, we don't equate Zionism with Judaism because we are firsthand witnesses to the diversity of thought in the Jewish community when it comes to Israel. So we're probably more offended than anybody else, right, when we get called anti-Semitic in our criticism of Israel. But then here's the thing, which, as you know, the accusation of anti-Semitism when it comes to criticizing Israel is not an honest criticism. Most of the people who are using that criticism don't really believe it. It's just a way to end the conversation. It's a way to brand somebody as something so disgusting so that you delegitimize their point of view completely. It's not even done with a good faith. It's just a way to brand all Palestinians as racist, backwards people, and to make all of our arguments illegitimate. Because if you call us anti-Semitic, then Israel must be right. And so that's what that's all about. That's why we have to fight back against it so clearly.
You're also not just an artist, like we said, you're also involved in academia. We've seen, and in South Africa, I'm from a student movement in South Africa. I cut my teeth in student activism. So we were very much aware of what's happening in the US. A year ago, a professor refused to write a recommendation for a student who wanted to study in Israel. He was released from work. There's a number of campus invasions from the Zionists. We know even Donald Trump now is trying to pass a bill on it. How's been the activism in academia? How's been the Palestinian, particularly Palestinian activism in academia, in your field and in your thoughts?
Well, there is much more of an awakening happening on college campuses. And what you can definitely say is that when people are fighting back, when the power is fighting back against pro-Palestinian people on campuses, to the point where the government is getting involved in trying to sometimes, criminalize or punish anti-Israel speech on campuses, it's a sign that we're doing pretty good. It's a sign that we're doing well and we're moving forward. So when I was in college in the mid-90s, we didn't have institutions that supported Palestinian activism. Our whole strategy was to go to Israeli events and sort of wait until the right time and then raise a Palestinian flag and start chanting and get kicked out. That was our whole strategy, okay? We didn't have anything more than that. And then I went to a talk at the University of Michigan a few years ago, and it was a pro-Palestinian, pro-BDS talk given by Omar Barghouti, who's one of the founders of BDS. And he was giving a talk, and it was full. There was 300 people there, all of them pro-BDS. And then I looked over in one section of the crowd, and there was a group of students that just, I don't know, they kind of looked out of place to me. I could tell they didn't belong. And it became time to ask questions. And then they got up and they went over to the microphone and they started asking, pro-Israel questions to Omar Barghouti. And, they were getting hissed at and booed at, and they eventually left. And I realized that that's what's happened. The roles have reversed on college campuses. We used to be the counter protesters. Now they're the counter protesters. And this is due to a lot of things. First, pro-Palestinian awareness, the awareness of the Palestinian question has become much heightened on college campuses. And that's a result of all the college activism over the last 40 or 50 years. And also, of course, the Jewish American community is starting to question these things no more. And they're not as instinctively defensive of everything Israel does as they were before. And so these dynamics are changing. So yes, I'm very optimistic about what's happening on campuses. When they try to fire a professor for being pro-BDS, I mean, look, you as a student, of course, you want your professors to write you but you don't have a right to a recommendation from a professor. If a professor says, hey, I don't want to write you a letter because you're going to Israel and I'm participating in BDS, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But when the whole weight of the university starts to come down on this professor, that is a sign of success. That's a sign that we're doing something right. And I'm very, very optimistic about the way college campuses are going.
And it's like I said, I'll refer to this term again, that it's very reminiscent of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. You had college campuses in the United States, college campuses in the UK, where apartheid was hugely supported, because as students you're going to have apartheid-free zones. And you are seeing it in the US, you are seeing it in the UK again, you're seeing it in the Scandinavian countries, you're seeing it in South Africa as well. American have, that majority of our universities, the student councils, have adopted BDS. 2 universities have officially cut ties with all Israeli institutions. So our campuses are apartheid-free campuses. We do not host Israeli events. We do not host Israeli sympathizers. And I think college campuses are becoming site of struggle again. Interestingly enough, there's also close ties between the Black liberation movements in Africa, in South Africa specifically, the Mandela-Arafat relationship, the Malcolm X Muslim and Palestine connection, the Black Panther and the Palestinian liberation movement. Those ties have historically been there, and we see the resurgence of them, the Black Lives Matter movement. When BLM rallies, you will see a short solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Mark Lamont here was also victimized for his Black Palestine solidarity. How is it that, how do you Palestinian Americans relate to that particular historical alliance that is coming back now?
Ali, I am honored to be here today talking with you and talking directly to brothers and sisters in South Africa, because my childhood, my parents are Palestinian refugees, and they came to America, and they've always been activists, and they're hippies. Okay, they were in California in the 70s. I mean, total hippies. And I have two major political memories from my childhood. One of them is being, woken up at 7 a.m. on Saturday mornings and taken down to New York City, and we would protest. And, Ali, when we Palestinians protest, we chant, and we don't care if it rhymes or it doesn't rhyme. You know, we just say, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want your war. 5, 6, 7, 8, free Palestine. You know, we don't care. It doesn't have to rhyme. Okay, we just say it. That's one of my memories. The second very, very strong memory in my mind is when we were growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Once a week or once every couple weeks, my parents would go to meetings and they would put me in the car with them. And they would drive to downtown Philadelphia in the 80s and meet with anti-apartheid activists in the 1980s. And it was because precisely that we were Palestinian and they saw our struggle as fully intertwined in that struggle. And it's important, like, to say it like you said it, that this is not a new connection. It was dormant for a while, right? Oslo and the end of apartheid, which happened, you know, within a few years of each other, sort of killed that connection for a while. But now a lot of it is resurging. The truth is, from the 50s until the 80s, that connection was very strong, right? And it's important that we understand that history and appreciate that history. And so when we Palestinians talk about South Africa, we don't think about South Africa as some faraway land that is not familiar to us. We think about South Africa the same way we think about ourselves. We think about it as brothers and sisters in struggle. And you're seeing that also with the Black Lives Matter movement. That's a little tougher connection for a lot of Palestinian Americans to make. Part of it is because, you know, we do business in these communities and sometimes we're part of the problem in some of these communities. But especially among younger people, you're seeing a strong connection between the Palestinian struggle and Black Lives Matter. And I've tried to make that connection for the past 5 or 6 years to my community so they see that very, very clearly. So I am very, again, happy that we are making these connections, but especially with the South African question, that is something Palestinians have always seen ourselves. And here's the other important thing. We're going through the same things, you know, and I don't know, maybe one day we will be treated as sort of normal and I don't know, happy people in the world by others. But here's the truth. When Malcolm was fighting for freedom and equality, he was an enemy of power and an enemy of the state. Same thing with Martin Luther King. Same thing with Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was officially designated a terrorist in America until the early 90s. Okay, so there's nothing wrong. I take pride in knowing that the powers that be in government don't want to hear our voices. They want to silence us and they want to intimidate us because that's what they've done to everyone else who has been speaking truth to power. And what we ask of the world, and we know that it's already happening in South Africa, but we need to ask it of the rest of the world, is see us like you saw apartheid in South Africa. See us like you saw Jim Crow in America. These kinds of things. I tell people, you don't have to read about apartheid and Jim Crow in history books. You can go to Palestine. Israel is performing the living museum act of all of these things right now, literally. Separate buses, separate roads, separate treatment. That's what's happening. You know, when Tutu has gone to South Africa, to Palestine, he has said that it's just like what he saw in South Africa, sometimes even worse. When Mandela's grandson has gone recently, who I believe he's a member of the parliament in South Africa, yes, when he has gone to Palestine, he's explicitly said that it was worse. And so, you know, and I'm not here to compare. Comparing things is silly. But my point is, South Africans make that connection. We make that connection. We need the rest of the world to understand that that connection is very strong. And like you said, it's not new. It's been going on for a long time. We have to re-educate people about the deep connection between the struggles in South Africa and the struggle in Palestine.
Yes, just to add, there's a number of South Africans who are stalwarts of the anti-apartheid movement, like Desmond Tutu says, it's just worse. The former Speaker of Parliament also said, you know what, apartheid South Africa was a playground compared to what Israel is doing. So it is far much. There's been evidence of this from people who have participated in the anti-apartheid struggle. Lastly, Amer, what would you say to many, number one, artists who are lured into performing in Israel for propaganda purposes, especially in the arts, in comedy and so on, and artists who are scared to speak on the issue of Palestine because of the obvious backlash from the powers that be?
Yeah. First, to the we ask for a cultural boycott of Israel, and let's be clear, the BDS movement has been very clear that it takes its inspiration almost fully from the anti-apartheid boycotts that were happening, because you need to put pressure on these regimes. A boycott is not only about economics, it's also about morality and letting somebody know, hey, this is not okay. And so what when we ask artists not to perform in Israel, what we are saying is, don't normalize what Israel is doing. Don't make it seem like, hey, there might be a conflict over there, but it's okay, we can have parties. Because you know what? The chances are that the places that you're performing at in Israel is a place where Palestinians were ethnically cleansed, and a place where there was probably a Palestinian village, and the inhabitants of that village are still alive in a refugee camp in Lebanon or Jordan or Gaza without the ability to ever go back there again. All of these things are connected. Like I said again, achaduha mefrushah, they took the place furnished. They didn't move into an empty place. They moved into a place that had a full civilization. And so when we ask people not to go there, or not to deal with Zionist organizations in America without making sure that Palestine is the center of debate, this is a plea from us Palestinians, because when you engage in these things, not only is it immoral, but it deeply damages the Palestinian cause and sometimes costs Palestinian lives. So, and the Israelis are the ones who benefit. In other words, they use it as cover. So they say, hey, everything's okay. Ali came here and performed a concert, so everything's okay in Israel. Well, everything's not okay in Israel. And we saw this with the peace deal, which made between Israel and the United Arab Emirates about a month ago. It was not a peace deal. They were never at war, but whatever. Okay, so this peace deal, the day after that was signed between the UAE and Israel, and that was the headline for 2 weeks, Israel bombed Gaza every day for 2 weeks after that, right? And so what these things do, whether it's the UAE or whether it's an artist or whatever it is, when you normalize with Israel, you give them cover to kill more of us, take more of our land, do more things. So the UAE has made this deal with Israel, and just yesterday, the prime minister approved 5,000 new settlement units. And that's not going to be sort of looked at as badly anymore, because hey, they just made peace. And this is why we ask people not to do these things. And look, listen to us. We Palestinians, we have a lot of experience with the Israelis, okay? We know how they act. We know what they do. We know what their motivations are, okay? Trust me, we know what we're talking about. So listen to us, ask us, and we will tell you what the first step of solidarity is. Listen to the oppressed people and follow what they're doing. Don't do something else. Even if you think innocently it might be in their interest, don't do something that they're asking you not to do. Trust me, we know how this government conducts itself. Let us be the ones who lead the way. And that's what we're asking for people with BDS.
Great. And just to wrap up, I mean, to those many artists who are scared, and we have them in South Africa, we have them in the African continent, to say, if I speak like this, I won't get a chance at that theater. What would you say to those?
Look, I would say to them, look, you might be right. You might be right, but you will gain a whole other audience right? That I think is bigger and definitely more loyal than whatever audience you have now if you do speak out about justice and you do speak out about Palestine. Yes, look, here's a newsflash to everybody, artists included. Speaking up for justice in the world sometimes comes with a material sacrifice. We all know that, right? It happened. Mark Lamont Hill, who lost his job at CNN, he hasn't once said, I regret what I said. He hasn't once complained about the treatment that he received. He understood that that could be a repercussion of what he did, but he spoke up anyway. Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, Tutu, Jesus, who was also a Palestinian. They guess what? They all went through major sacrifices. So if Mandela could be in prison for 27 years, you're telling me as a singer or an artist or a musician, you can't handle some criticism from Zionists or not being allowed to perform in Israel because you speak up for justice? Hey, I mean, if that's your point of view, then maybe we don't need your solidarity, but we would still like it. And trust me, you will gain a much bigger audience if you speak up for justice. I go through that myself. I know that there's a million doors closed to me. I've been doing comedy for 15 years. I've been on the biggest stages in America, but I know that there's a very small chance that I'll ever be like on a mainstream late night TV show or anything like that because of my political views and what I say openly. But when I go to Palestinian events in America, or when I go to Palestine and people there take me aside and say, thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for speaking our voice on stage. Thank you for talking about our struggle. Or sometimes they even say, thank you for saying things that I can't say because of my workplace or whatever. All of those things are worth 1,000 times more to me than whether I'm ever going to be on a TV show or have some validation from the American established mainstream culture. Trust me, it feels better when you do the right thing. That's what I would say to artists.
Thank you so much, Amer. Amer is very much active on Twitter and on Facebook. I know that the stuff that's been said on this webinar is very thought-provoking, and people would like to ask more questions. He's available on Twitter, he's available on social media. Please pick up his brain there. Amer, this video will remain in the video tab section on our page, and other people can go to it as point of reference, or those who have not watched it can watch it there. But the most important part is, as a Palestinian artist, as a Palestinian academic, those who have questions should be able to say, look, we have questions on here and this. And we appreciate having you here today. I appreciated having this conversation with you. And I hope we have many more of these programs in the future.
And I hope that when this is all done, this pandemic, that I can finally make it down to South Africa and do a show there and be with our brothers and sisters together. And thank you, Ali, for everything that you do. You know you don't have to say thank you to a brother, and Palestinians and South Africans are brothers and sisters, but thank you for everything you do to make sure that this struggle always stays up front and people know about Palestine. So thank you.
Appreciate it, Amer. Thank you again, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.